So we all know South Carolina, the expectations with this Gamecock fan base are just through the roof after the 7-win season, winning in the postseason. Now the team looks to be a lot better across the board here entering year 2, and I just felt like those comments would kind of kick that momentum forward just a little bit more heading into our interview here with Keith Allsep. And I want to make a quick note. I tried to clean up this audio as best as I could, but it starts out fine and it ends fine, but in the middle there, I think on his end, the audio quality is not great. I do apologize, but again, it picks up, it's crystal clear at the end of it. So sorry about the audio quality. I'm not sure what happened, but just through the recording process, there were some issues there with the recording process. But let's kick it over to Keith Allsep, host of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. All right, we're pleased to once again be joined by my guy, Keith Allsep. He runs the Go-To Gamecock podcast. He's the host of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. You give Keith a follow at K Allsep and give the podcast a follow at Gamecock Pod. Keith, thank you so much for joining me once again. I always love our chats here.
Oh, me too. It's just a pleasure to be in your, among your greatness as the dean of SEC podcast.
Well, I appreciate the kind words, Keith, but, obviously I stick to football. That's what, has my attention 365. But I do want to ask you, because I know you're a big women's basketball fan, and it's a huge, huge week for Dawn Staley and company. I just wanted to get your thoughts real quick. Do you think the Gamecocks are going to cut down the nets there in Minneapolis?
Well, I mean, they have been the number one team all season long. In the history of the AP poll, 11 women's basketball teams have been ranked number one wire to wire, okay, from the first poll to the last poll. 10 of those became national champions. And so the odds are in their favor, but I've said this since February. South Carolina will only go as far as their starting backcourt can take them. They've got to be able to make shots. Destiny Henderson did that against Creighton. They were kind of the Cinderella team. South Carolina beat them 80-50, and Zia Cook only took 4 shots. She didn't score any points, but she played great defense. But somebody other than Aaliyah Boston's going to have to make shots for South Carolina to cut down the nets. And, once you get to the Final Four, Michael, it's 2 one-game seasons.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the way it is. And so I like South Carolina's chance to get to the final on Sunday night. They beat Stanford back in December. They blitzed UConn when they were healthy in November. And so, as we all saw in the SEC tournament, anything can happen. But you have to like their chances. You got the best player in the country, and you probably got the deepest and most talented roster in the country. But it all comes down to a one-game season. It's survive in advance or you go home.
Well, I know the SEC will be rooting for the Gamecocks there in Minneapolis, and Gamecock fans, hopefully this is just the start of a championship year for you there in Columbia. So let's transition to football. Spring football, of course, going on right now, the second year under Shane Beamer. Based on what you've seen, what you've heard, where do you think the biggest growth Shane Beamer has made in his second season as a head coach leading the South Carolina program is?
Well, I think the biggest thing is from what I've been told and what's been relayed to me is Shane Beamer is much more comfortable, much more assertive in his role. Last year, he really didn't know his team during spring practice. He really didn't have a feel for even his coordinators at that point. Now, I think the players and Shane Beamer both are more comfortable with each other, and they all come to practice knowing what to expect. And so I think just from an energy standpoint, you hear that a lot from people that are inside the building. The energy level in practice, players love coming to practice. The positivity is still in place. The culture continues to grow. And so I think, big picture, that would be my biggest takeaway. But as far as on the field, the biggest change is at the quarterback position with Spencer Rattler. Last year it was Luke Doty, and it was Jason Brown, who was a Division III player. Brown didn't get to practice much because of health and safety protocols. Luke Doty was a true sophomore who had split time at quarterback and wide receiver as a freshman. A brand new offense, a new system, but now you bring in Spencer Rattler, and while it's a new system for him, that's a very experienced quarterback and elite arm talent, and a guy that is Pro Football Focus's number 3 returning college quarterback behind Alabama's Heisman Trophy winner and the guy that beat him out, who has since also left Oklahoma and transferred to Southern Cal, and Caleb Williams.
Yeah, so safe to say that the Gamecocks are getting everything they hoped for when they got Spencer Rattler, based on what I know it's early, but a couple weeks into camp, and there's no chance in hell he's not the starting quarterback as long as he's healthy, is there?
Yeah, people keep asking that question, like, when are you going to name a starting quarterback? And my response would be, hey, Captain Obvious, spoiler alert, it's going to be Spencer Rattler. Okay. That's just the bottom line. Barring an injury, by all accounts, Spencer Rattler has come in and worked extremely hard with the team in the winter program. A lot of the guys have gravitated towards him. He's been a great teammate, an excellent leader, and by all accounts, just a big-time arm talent.
Yeah, no doubt, and he's got something to prove, but which should only help his game if he puts in the work this offseason. But someone else there in Columbia that's got a lot to prove, particularly to that fan base, is Marcus Satterfield, of course, the offensive coordinator. Very rough debut, but I'm not asking you to say he's going to be the best offensive coordinator in the country or anything, but is there a chance that now with a big time quarterback, added weapons at receiver and tight end, I think they really like the depth at running back. The offensive line is going to remain a question mark until we see it, but assuming those pieces fall into place, maybe do you think it was maybe a little bit of a rush to judgment on Marcus Satterfield? And do you think he could have a big bounce back year given all the tools he'll have to work with this season?
Well, I was very open about my criticism of Marcus Satterfield. I probably would not have brought him back, but then again, he was not in my wedding. So, look, when you're trying to bring an NFL system, when you only spend a year in the NFL yourself, and that's the highest level job you have, I think the hope, and I think what you have to hope for if you're a Gamecock fan, is Marcus Satterfield learned a lot during his first season as offensive coordinator. Certainly, his coaches learned a lot. Hopefully, there was some division. There was, some stuff that wasn't great that went on behind the scenes between him and how he treated some of the offensive staff. They had a closed door meeting where Shane Beamer came in and locked the door, and they aired all their grievances, kind of like Festivus, the airing of grievances. And they worked it all out. And so you have to hope, number one, that he learned how to become a better offensive coordinator. You do have the comfort level with all the returning players on the system being in place, so they're not all, learning how to build an airplane from scratch. Yeah. And then certainly said, adding Spencer Rattler, Austin Stogner, Antoine Juice Wells, a record-setting receiver from James Madison, the running back room. Yes, they lost to Quandre White and Kevin Harris, but Marshawn Lloyd looks like that five-star guy that he was coming out of high school now. Christian Beal-Smith comes in from Wake Forest, and a guy named Rashad Amos, who missed last season with an injury, he's back. And he's a big, fast, powerful man, 6'2", 225 pounds. And so he's in the mix. And then Juju McDowell, who was spectacular in the bowl game, he returns as well as Lavoisier Carroll, who was a top 100 recruit, who was a running back. And when he got to Georgia, Kirby Smart tried to make a cornerback out of him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you hit on Marshawn Lloyd there. I think that's a guy that, clearly South Carolina fans know all about, but I think the rest of the SEC may have kind of forgotten about him. 2 years removed from his tough knee injury. Do you think this is the year he finally breaks out? Because I'm sitting here thinking with Spencer Rattler and potentially, a huge breakout season coming from Marshawn Lloyd, all of a sudden South Carolina's got, man, they're cooking right there if they got that.
Well, I mean, certainly you have to hope for more consistent offensive line play. Like, you can't just take the game against the Florida Quitters, Auburn a little bit, and then North Carolina, who basically the bullfighter Olay defense. I mean, teams were running up basketball numbers on them, which of course are a basketball school, and usually after October, leaves the football stadium and goes to blue-white scrimmages. So the South Carolina certainly needs better offensive line play, more consistent good offensive line play. The good news is everybody that finished the season back, and they have 7 players who have started multiple games on the offensive line.
Now, let me ask you about Jaheem Bell, because it seems like, for whatever reason, he may have been the most underutilized player on the team last year, and when they did get him involved, I mean, he was sensational. What's the deal there? And, do you look for him to be utilized a lot more in the offense this season?
I do. And Jaheim Bell was underutilized. I mean, he's kind of a bigger version of Deebo Samuel. I mean, this guy is 6'3", 230 pounds. Tore his ACL senior year in high school. When he came in, he had to have a meniscus repair done, so he was not much of a factor through freshman season in 2020. This past year, they used him exclusively tight end, even though other members of the offensive coaching staff thought he should be flexed out and even put in the slot which the kid enjoyed play most of the time until the bowl game. But I think he, got a good taste of what Jaheim Bell can do in the bowl game. I mean, 2 big explosive plays for touchdown, 15, 20-yard run on the first play from scrimmage. I mean, this is a guy that had been committed to Florida. I mean, he was a big-time recruit out of Alabama to Georgia, and a guy that I think you have to call him a joker, right? Like he's a wild card. You should give him some touches at running back. You should move him all over the place as H-back, the slot, outside. I think that's a big thing I want to see from Marcus Satterfield. How can you utilize a guy like him? Maybe I want to talk to Kyle Shanahan, the 49ers, that and how they use Debo Samuel because, this guy is the best playmaker on South Carolina's campus, and you've got to get him in more than, time, one catch, two catches, and then 2 or 3 weeks in a row with no catch. They've got to get him involved. He's, 6 to 10 touches every week in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think Clayton White, hell, I didn't even know who he was when he got the South Carolina job, but he just did a remarkable job taking a defense that I know, we have such a short-term memories, but under Will Muschamp, I mean, the defense was just dreadful. And last season, for much of the season, I'd say they were the better unit there in Columbia. So how do they go from good to great on that side of the ball in Columbia this season under Clayton White in year 2?
I think it's just like the offense. I think you have to hope, for more consistency. They were great against the run against some teams, and then like Missouri and Clemson, they just ran it, right down their throats. And I think part of it was just the linebacker play. I think South Carolina's defensive line, was really good most of the time. Linebackers, Missouri runs that outside zone, and, Damani Staley, who stepped in after Sherrod Green's injury in the Georgia game, he was the primary middle linebacker. And if you're asking that guy to, get outside the tackle box and make plays, he just can't do it. Now, Sherrod Green got an extra year. He's back. He's healthy. He's working out at linebacker. There are some younger guys in the mix there. But I think for me, the biggest key for run defense is going to be improved linebacker play. South Carolina has to be better at identifying runs, gap integrity with the linebackers. And then in the SEC, you've got to have guys that can get there. If a guy takes a false step and he's a 4'8" or 4'9" guy in the 40, odds are he's not going to get there. You've got to have big-time athletes at linebacker, particularly when you run a nickel defense and predominantly only use 2 linebackers.
Mm-hmm. Now, this offseason, Keith, I mean, you could make the argument for South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky. I would even throw Florida, because they got talent, and I think they got a good coaching staff in there now. Of those 4, can you make the case for the audience of why South Carolina will finish with a better record than anybody in the East, with the exception, of course, of Georgia? And hell, I got my questions about Georgia. Everybody's penciling them in back to Atlanta. I'm not ready to go quite that far. So make the case for South Carolina taking that big jump in year 2.
All right. So generally when South Carolina has Kentucky and Vanderbilt on the road, although Kentucky has certainly become problematic for South Carolina over the last decade, that's when you have the easier schedule. Missouri comes to Columbia, South Carolina. Tennessee comes to Columbia, South Carolina. Georgia and Texas A&M will come to Columbia. Arkansas, they lost a lot of guys in the portal, but you go there early. And so Arkansas and A&M are your 2 Western opponents. Then you're at Vanderbilt and you're at Kentucky. And so for me, with Spencer Rattler, Jaheem Bell, with all the weapons in place, at running back, wide receiver, I think South Carolina will probably get a commitment right after their spring game from Arkansas State, transfer receiver Corey Rucker. He'll come in the summer. Josh Vann is back. Like I said, you returned 7 guys who've started a lot of games on that offensive line. And you brought back a lot of players on defense. Cam Smith was Pro Football Focus's #1 returning cornerback. They shored up the safety position with Devontae Reed, a transfer from Central Michigan that had offers from Texas and most of the SEC. I mean, there's a lot to like about this team. That's a veteran team. And when you add an elite quarterback and more playmakers, that makes your entire outlook different. I mean, you look at teams in the National Football League, even in the SEC. I mean, outside of Georgia, which could not beat Alabama, by the way, when their wide receivers were healthy in the SEC championship game. If you have an elite quarterback, I mean, over 90% of the time, the team with the better quarterback wins. I don't know, how many times Spencer Rattler will not be the best quarterback on the field. And I think that is what gives South Carolina, along with a, plethora of veteran players returning on offense, defense, and special teams, a great chance to potentially finish second in the East.
All right, last thing for you, Keith. So I don't want to overlook that Arkansas game that you referenced, because Arkansas is a good team. And Texas Longhorns found out real quick how tough Razorback Stadium is, particularly at night. We don't know when that game will take place. But, moving just one game ahead on that, Georgia comes to Williams-Brice Stadium. And, like you said, there's questions about Georgia, particularly Stetson Bennett's going to have to carry that team. And this is a guy that leading up to the national championship game, the fan base was done with him. Now he's a hero. I get it. He won, but it's pretty bizarre how anytime I question Stetson Bennett, it's like they forget that they doubted him for 14, 15 games. But what percentage would you give the Gamecocks to pull that upset week 3, Williams-Brice Stadium, Georgia coming to town? And let's not act like this South Carolina team, this program, hell, they upset North Carolina. They upset Auburn. They upset Florida. I mean, this is a team that already knows how to get that done. What percentage chance, given what we know right now, would you give South Carolina to pull that upset early in the season?
I mean, look, you got to give the devil their due. Kirby Smart is now a national championship coach. He beat Nick Saban in the national championship game. But at the same time, they are losing a ton of guys. I mean, they may have 5 or 6 first-round draft picks, as well as, losing a George Pickens. He's gone to the NFL draft. Steve Spurrier used to always say, I like playing Georgia the first 2 or 3 games of the year because usually they'd have 4 or 5 guys suspended. So, maybe if, that holds to form and Georgia's missing some players, I'd still probably say 1 in 5. I mean, that'd be, 1 in 5 chance. I mean, until South Carolina shows that they are an explosive offense, until they show that they can stop the run against a big-time program, it's hard for me to pick it. I mean, I do think that there's a lot to like about this team, but I still have questions about Marcus Satterfield, and I still have questions about how good the linebacker play is going to be. And until those questions are answered, I can't pick that.
I got you. Well, we're going out on a low note. I was waiting for you to go all in, guarantee the upset here, but I understand. I mean, hell, we're talking arguably the most talented roster in college football, so I won't hold that against you. But you'll be changing your tune come September. I'll wait for Keith to predict that one, but he's Keith Allsep, host of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. Don't forget to give him a follow at KAllsep, and don't forget to check out the podcast at the Gamecock Pod. Keith, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you.
Absolutely. My pleasure as always. And thanks for not playing Rocky Top while I was